Hey, everyone, and welcome back to this week's Primer podcast. We are in the final week of our commission series, and we are joined once again by the former president of World Vision, author of the book Unfinished that we've based this series on, and again, importantly, my dad, Rich Stearns. So, Dad, we're glad to have you back. This week, you're on vacation, so joining us from your iPad in a hotel room. So thank you for making space for us. Even in the midst of the craziness. Hey, one fun thing that I want to mention before we jump into this podcast is that actually this will not be the last people are seeing of you, and you're actually going to be coming back in August to be a guest speaker in our Storytellers series. So you'll be back on August 25th. To be able to kind of share with us and share a little bit of your heart. So if you guys have not made plans for that weekend, please save the date and be here, and you'll get to meet my dad and hear from his heart in person. So, Dad, thank you for joining us today, and thank you for joining us here in just a couple of months.
Yeah, looking forward to it, and looking forward to seeing those boys of yours.
Yeah. Exactly. I think you're gonna get to see all the cousins too, or all the cousins on the East Coast here, because right. I think the boys, I guess for you, all the grandkids, but the cousins will be coming down and hanging out as well. So, hey, this week we're kind of entering into this space where we're starting to say, okay, we've stirred the vision, we've stirred the recognition of the commissioning, and now it's time to do it, right? And I think one of the emphases of this week is recognizing that so often we overcomplicate the call of the commission, right? We see things like we saw last week in Acts chapter 1 and the beginning of Acts chapter 2, where the Holy Spirit moves in remarkable ways. The disciples preach the gospel message in all of these different languages. Thousands of people are baptized in this one moment, and we think to ourselves, I don't have those gifts. I don't even know where to go to have those gifts. And yeah, even if the Holy Spirit will show up, like, what's the framework for us to be able to do that? And this week, we're really looking at how, for the most part, the gospel message was shared in really simple acts of togetherness. The gospel grew from these 3,000 individuals that came to know Jesus on Pentecost to today. There are 2.4 billion confessing Christians in the world, and that growth happened in really simple acts. In fact, Acts chapter 2, 42 through 46 or through 47 really has kind of the heartbeat of how the church has grown over the centuries. They said they devoted themselves, meaning the 3,000, to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. And I think one of the realizations here is the simple blueprint for this growth that we see is really they meet together, they worship together, they gather with one another, they experience that Christian fellowship. From that Christian fellowship, they pray for their community. They're connected to their community through prayer, and that prayer leads them to have meals with their neighbors, with their community, and those meals bring them in connection with the need of their community. And I think it's just as simple as that, is it's recognizing the needs that is praying that God opens our eyes to the needs, recognizing the needs that are in front of us, and then leaning into them in a way that impacts change in our communities and communities across the world, and ultimately in the kingdom of heaven. So Dad, I'm curious, all of your years at World Vision, You can think about these big, significant actions that have been taken. You can think about these causes that have raised millions of dollars to impact change. But tell me a little bit about experiences that you've had with people that have done things that seem insignificant and yet have had a sweeping impact.
Yeah, Pete. Well, there's a chapter in my book called Spiritual Dominoes, and
Yeah.
we're all familiar with those domino chain reactions that you can see on YouTube, where somebody lines up 50,000 dominoes,
Right.
and then they push the first one over, and it goes around and around and up and over hills, and at the end there's usually a big grand finale, at the end of the domino chain reaction. And I use that metaphor to describe the way God works through his church, right? It's like every one of us has been is a domino that God has strategically placed in a particular position. And of course, every domino in a chain reaction has a responsibility to do its thing, right? If the second domino doesn't perform, then the whole chain reaction stops, and what God was going to do stops if we're not faithful to where he's placed us and how he's called us. And
I think sometimes we stop because we're like, well, I'm not a grand finale domino, and not in a way that like, hey, I wish I was, but it's like we look at ourselves and we're like, I'm insignificant, and in doing so we've missed out on the whole thing that God's working.
Well, I saw a great example of this. I want to take you back to the 1970s. A family somewhere,
you're really taking me back.
A family somewhere in America decided to sponsor a little boy in Africa, in Kenya, in the 1970s. And this family, we don't know who they were actually because the records are lost. But
and just to clarify for people, sponsorship is,
well, when you can sponsor a child today, it's like $39 a month, and you sponsor a child somewhere in the world. World Vision's been doing this since the 1950s, and you can write letters to that child and get letters back from that child. And World Vision uses that money to really help that child, with food and clean water, and staying in school and vacation Bible school and things like that. So in the 1970s, this family sponsored this boy in Kenya. He was an orphan. His father had died, leaving the family very poor. There were lots of children in the family, like 12, 13 children. And it was in the middle of a famine in Kenya when they sponsored him. So that sponsorship, along with other people who sponsored children, allowed World Vision to go into that community and help those children, to really help those children make it through the famine and have enough food to eat and all the things I talked about before. So first of all, the family who did this probably thought, well, we don't have a lot of money. We can't do much, right? But we could sponsor one little boy and maybe make a difference in his life, right? And so they did, and they faithfully paid probably was $20 a month back then. They faithfully paid their sponsorship over the next, 15, 20 years. And so in 2016, I got to go to Kenya to meet this boy who was now in his 50s.
Yeah.
And it turned out that he became the Archbishop of the Anglican Church of Kenya, responsible for 5 million Anglican Christians in the nation of Kenya. He was very influential. He met with the Kenyan president regularly. But you see, the point is, in that domino chain reaction, this family, way back at the beginning of the chain reaction, decided, well, we can do one small thing. We'll sponsor this little boy. But then God worked it out so that 50 years later, he became the Archbishop of Kenya. And so, they were sponsoring a child, but God was growing an archbishop. And I think the moral of that story is we have no idea what God can do with our small acts of kindness, our small acts of generosity. There's a passage in, I think it's in Mark chapter 4, about the farmer who scatters his seeds, and he has no idea how it happens, but God causes those seeds to sprout, and then a stalk comes up, and then whether we growing corn or whatever you're growing, barley or wheat, all of a sudden there's a harvest. But the harvest is brought by God. Our job is to plant the seeds and trust that God's going to use those seeds to bring a great harvest. And that's what happened with this little boy. And it's just one example.
Well, and the interesting thing that gets my head spinning here is so even there that one little boy that turns into the archbishop and impacts 5 million, right? That's kind of the grand finale. And the family, yes, is taking a small step, but I even think about, I've been at these sponsorship events and we sponsor children ourselves, and how many times do you sponsor a child because a friend encouraged you to sponsor a child? And so I think about the friend that maybe encouraged this family to sponsor that child, and the impact of just that one encouragement to do that. I think about the other people that sponsored children in this young man's village, that raised the overall experience of community in that village, that maybe then precipitated into creating opportunities there. And it's just wild when you think about those ripples, really, that go the opposite direction, right? They come in and they culminate in this one, powerful movement. But there's this reality that every conversation that we're having, every time that we're encouraging people to lean into the stirrings that God's placing on their heart, is we're cultivating opportunities for the gospel to grow, for impact to be made. And so, what a powerful story.
I've got a great encouragement story for your Sunday school teachers at St. Mark's. So back in the 1850s, a man named Ed Kimball taught kind of the high school age Sunday school at his church in Boston. And a guy came to, a young man who was 17 came to his class, and he was very disruptive, and he was vulgar, and he swore. Just a surly teenager came to his class, and he came several weeks in a row, but he was hard to deal with, right? And so anyways, this Sunday school teacher, Ed Kimball, met with this boy outside of church,
right,
and witnessed to him and talked to him about the need for Jesus in his life, and actually led him to Christ in the back of a shoe store where the boy worked, the young boy worked.
Right.
Well, that boy was Dwight L. Moody,
right,
who became the greatest evangelist of the 19th century.
Right.
But the story doesn't end there. Moody led so many people to Christ over his career. You can trace, this person who led this person to Christ, who led this person to Christ, who led this person to Christ. There's actually a chain reaction until the year 1936, I think it was.
Yeah.
When a 17-year-old boy in Charlotte, North Carolina, came forward at a tent meeting to commit his life to Christ, to one of the Moody disciples that was in that chain reaction of dominoes, and that teenage boy in Charlotte was Billy Graham.
Yeah.
So it started with a Sunday school teacher,
right,
and it resulted in Dwight L. Moody and Billy Graham. And the Sunday school teacher might have been led to Christ by his grandmother. We don't know.
Yeah, I know. I love that story. I mean, it's that idea where, I remember in elementary school in first grade when the teacher, kind of turned to us and said, who would offered us all, you can either have $1 million today, or you can have one penny doubled every day for a month, right? And every single kindergartner said they wanted $1 million. And so she gave us $1 million, right? Play money or whatever. And then each day from that day forward on the whiteboard or on the chalkboard, she, put up the compounding 1 penny a day kind of thing. And sure enough, when you get to day 31, that's $10 million. Wow. And it's wild how that grows. And I think that's we get so caught up in looking for the $1 million impact that we miss out on this compounding impact of the simple thing every day, right? The simple little task every day of saying, what if I talk to one person today, and what if that one person talked to somebody tomorrow, and and there's just this powerful impact that can happen when we lean in that way. So I love the story that you shared about the impact of a child sponsorship. If y'all are interested in child sponsorship, I would encourage you to look into it. World Vision does a phenomenal job with that. It's also a really fun way to invite your children into caring for global needs and crises, and be able to write letters. I know my boys like writing letters to our sponsored kids. But Dad, tell me about, obviously we talked a little bit about this last week, is that you kind of got into World Vision from an unlikely place. You were not somebody that had grown up in those charitable spaces from a professional background, and you weren't somebody from a vocational background that had grown up in ministry. You obviously, as raising us as kids, we grew up in the church, and you were highly invested in the church, but maybe didn't necessarily have the tools necessary to do the job that God had called you into, and yet you were faithful in giving what you had. And so, what has that looked like for you? Where maybe like tangible small pieces where it was like this was something that God gave me a heart for, and I did the little things, and now some 30 years later I can zoom out and say, and look at what's happened.
Yeah. Well, as you know, when I was offered the job to come to World Vision, I didn't want the job. I was in my corporate career. I was making good money. Our whole family was settled in Pennsylvania. The last thing I wanted to do was quit my job, quit my career, move to Seattle, and take the job with World Vision.
Right.
So I did it kind of out of a sense of, well, I guess I need to be obedient here. I don't really want to be obedient, but all right, Lord. And of course, I didn't feel qualified for the job either because I had no experience with poverty or global hunger or anything like that. So I took a step of faith and said, all right, Lord, maybe you know best. I don't really want to do this, but I'm going to do it. Well, anyways, on one of my first trips with World Vision, I think it was 1999, you might remember we sent your brother Andy to Ghana to look at the clean water program there and to ride around the country with the drilling crews, the World Vision drilling crews that were bringing clean water to communities. And I went over there at the end of the summer to pick him up and bring him home and to see the work in Ghana.
Yeah, he was a high school student at the time.
He was in high school, yeah. And I was so impressed with this clean water work, and I'm the new guy at World Vision, and because clean water changes people's lives. I mean, imagine living in a community or a village where you don't have water to drink. I mean, you literally have to walk maybe 2 miles to a dirty pond and just scoop out water, and you're drinking this filthy water that's filled with bacteria and everything else, and it causes children literally to die, certainly to get sick.
Yeah.
So anyway, I was so struck with this. I came back to World Vision headquarters and I said, well, are we doing this all over the world? And they said, oh, no, we just do this in one country. We're kind of learning the ropes on clean water. They said, you have no idea how technically complex it is and how expensive it is to do clean water. We only do this in one country. And I remember thinking, we've got to do this. We should be doing this everywhere, because how do you really help the poor if you don't deal with the water issue in their community? We were doing a lot of other things with the poor, health issues and microfinance loans and, keeping kids in school and all kinds of things that we were doing that were good. So anyways, it stuck in the back of my mind. And every couple of years I'd say, well, gee, can't we expand it a little bit more? And I think it was about 10 years in, we were now in 4 countries doing clean water. And I was still frustrated, because we worked in 80 countries. And so I called a meeting in 2009, I think, and I said, I'm tired of hearing why we can't do clean water everywhere we work. What would it take to actually do it? Let's ask that question. What would it take to do it? Because we know how to do it now. And they said it would take a massive amount of money. And I said, well, how much? And they said $250 million startup costs, to buy drilling rigs, to hire, several hundred people. So I said, okay, well, let's go raise $250 million then. And it was kind of a step of faith. Lord, if you want us to do this, we're going to need $250 million. We launched a capital campaign, a 5-year campaign. And our donors were incredibly generous. They responded, they saw the need. And we raised $250 million for clean water. And by the year 2015, 5 years later, the campaign was finished. We were now the #1 provider of clean water in the world.
Wow.
Bringing clean water to 3.5 million people a year. And since we launched that campaign, since 2010, which is about 14 years ago, we've brought clean water to 35 million people around the world. And we're still #1 in the world. But it was like me taking a step of faith again to say, Lord, you can do this. I can't do this. You can raise the money. You own the cattle on 1,000 hills. But God needed somebody to take that step, right? And, so it's just kind of an example of, if we're obedient, God can do really big things, big things with our small steps of obedience.
Well, and wasn't kind of a passion project of yours within that the country of Rwanda?
Yeah, in fact, when I retired, well, by the way, so today World Vision is doing clean water in more than 50 countries.
Wow.
And expanding every day. And now, so when I retired in 2018, I kind of threw out a retirement challenge. I said, the greatest gift you could give me would be, let's finish the job in one of the countries. These countries are big, lots of people.
Right, yeah, these are countries.
So we selected Rwanda, and finish the job meant to bring clean water to every person in every community in which we worked in that country. So in Rwanda, that turned out to be 1.2 million people we had to bring clean water to. And so, we threw that challenge out to the donors. We had to raise another $35 million just to do the Rwanda project.
Yeah.
And 5 years later, they called me and said, we did it. We brought clean water to 1.2 million people, and they invited me and your mom to go over and celebrate, the last well. And we met the little girl who was the 1 millionth beneficiary of the clean water. Her name was Vanessa.
Yeah.
And we saw how it changed her life. And now she used to have to walk 2 miles down steep hills and carry these heavy jerry cans of water back to her home. And now 10 yards outside of their house is a water point where her mom and her can just get clean water anytime they want it. They can just go to the spigot and fill their cans. And so anyways, it was really gratifying to see. And now we're trying to finish the job in Zambia, finish the job in Ghana, finish the job in Honduras.
Right.
Just adding countries, and we're just trying to roll it out.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, you mentioned Honduras. You sent my brother in high school to dig clean water wells in Ghana, and then when I was in high school, you sent me to Honduras, and I dug toilets.
There you go. Toilets are important too.
Yeah, I dug latrines, and you never caught fire for that. You never said we need to bring latrines to every child in the world. So I don't know if I should read into that at all, but I'm glad to hear Honduras is now close to receiving clean water for everyone in the country. So Dad, what a blessing it's been to hear from you and really to experience that conviction. Even my wheels are spinning just in this conversation about, hey, what would that look like for St. Mark's to take on a bold challenge like that, to invest deeply in a community, to bring water to a community. And so I know if that's stirring in me, that's stirring in other people too. And we couldn't have that without that nudge. So thank you for taking the time with being with us for the last 6 weeks. We're excited for you to come out August 25th and be here. And I think we're going to have a little luncheon afterwards and maybe a book signing as well for you to chat with some folks. And it's such a blessing to have done a father-son podcast. Who knows? Maybe this is the start of something new. Really grateful for your wisdom and your thought.
Yeah, well, happy to do it, and looking forward to August when I'll be out there, and your congregation will learn that I'm not nearly as good a preacher as my son is. So
I don't know about that. Well, they'll also learn that we have all of the exact same mannerisms while we preach, the same hand motions, these kind of things. Same
Probably.
voice, same throat clears. So I learned from the best. Well, folks, enjoy your conversations. Dig into this. I know many of us are on breaks from our groups. We're on vacations and those kind of things. But lean into this and see where God might be stirring in you to dive into those simple acts of togetherness that can change the world. Stop focusing on the $1 million idea and start focusing on the 1 cent step and see what God can do with that. We'll see you soon. Thanks.
Go on.